Hello, I'm Richard Haight, and today I'd like to address a question that I actually got from the internet. It's something that I have considered quite often through having visions, but I was watching the Joe Rogan podcast last night, and there was Elon Musk was on. So if you're interested in a very abstract conversation, pardon me, if you're interested in a very unusual conversation, you might find that an interesting conversation. But at some point in the conversation, Joe asked Elon Musk if reality was a simulation. And this is a question that I had asked many times in my life until I had a certain realization. And it doesn't take any speculation to answer this question. In fact, the question itself is flawed, and therefore, because the question itself is flawed, the answer is also necessarily flawed. So the question is reality a simulation? But if you look at the definition of a simulation, I've got it written down here, it is the imitative representation of one system or process by means of the functioning of another. So it necessitates that there's an original process, and then there's a secondary process. And the secondary process, it's a different process, a different system is mimicking the original process. So that there's essentially two different processes going on. But if reality equals a simulation, there is not two processes going on. It's only one process because it is equal to the simulation. It is the simulation. In Elon Musk's mind, according to how he expressed it, with using the word simulation, as well as Joe Rogan's mind, there is reality and then there is the simulation, and they are distinct things. And we are in a simulation of reality, a mimicking of reality. But using those words, it indicates that there are two things at the same time saying that they are one, because simulation is reality. According to the question, is reality a simulation? So the question itself is, as it is stated with the words chosen, a meaningless question. And so the image that people have in their mind is, okay, so there's some original reality, and then there's a simulation, and that maybe we're in this simulation. And that now we're creating artificial intelligence, which is another simulation, because at some point, the artificial intelligence and the computer systems that we merge with or experience or play with will be indecipherable, indiscernible from the simulation that we're in of reality. So we have reality, which we don't experience. Then we have the simulation that we're in, according to this theory of simulation theory. And then there's, within the simulation, we're also creating another simulation that we will not be able to tell the difference between it and this simulation. And so now we get this kind of lineup of simulations, almost like levels of simulation, all of which appear identical or are indecipherable, indeterminable from one another. And if you just play this out, it stretches into infinity. So the idea is that there's some original simulation, and then there's all the simulations that are born off of that and through time. But that is a projection of the mind based on a sense of place and time. But your projection of mind based off place and time would also be part of the simulation. So I guess another way of saying this, might be, because it's quite counterintuitive, another way of saying this is, we try to create a measurement of the universe. The universe is so many, countless miles wide or whatever, this idea that the universe could be measured. And there is that idea that it could be measured. But the problem is, by the definition of measurement, all measurement is a comparison to something else. And since we're in the universe, our measurements are coming from within it. We're not measuring it to something else. We're measuring it to itself. It's a meaningless measurement relative to itself. So we would have to actually have a measurement that means anything, be able to step out of the universe and measure it to another universe, or to something larger than that universe, that maybe that universe is within. But since that's not possible, certainly right now, there can be no measurement of the universe, which essentially means the universe is infinitely large or infinitely small. And it matters not which way you see it. It has no size. It can't be measured, therefore it has no size. As size is a representation of a measurement. So the question then is, what is reality? To say it's a simulation means that there is no original. There is no reality. There is only the simulation. So you can't say reality is simulation. You can say there is simulation. Or you could just say there's reality. Realities within realities within realities. But that gets very, very confusing. And there's a simple way to cut through all of that confusion. And that is just to recognize there's perception. There is and always has been perception. It's the most fundamental we could get and put it into words. There's the statement of Descartes that I think, therefore I am. That is not fundamentally, that is less accurate than to say there is perception. And I think, therefore I am is based on certain assumptions. First is that there is an I to think. Second is that thought is originated in I. So therefore I is the source of thought. I think, therefore I am. And the issue with that is what happens during the times when one is not thinking. At that time, is one not? Do you see it? Descartes' idea of I think, therefore I am requires that you be constantly thinking in order to be. And that is a contradiction to the reality, because there are times when one is not thinking. Or more accurately, see, that statement is not quite true either. It assumes that one thinks, that there is a subject that thinks. It would be more accurate to say there are thoughts. Who is having those thoughts is irrelevant. There is no who. There is the perception of thoughts. The reason we would like there to be a who is because we want to validate our experience. To say we are a subject. I am. But the reality is, when you've had sufficient awareness, the sense of I just starts to become very, very questionable and disappears ultimately. And there is purely just perception. There is just perception. So one might ask, what happens when there is not perception? The interesting thing about that question is the fact that perception is unaware of when there is not perception. There is no awareness of when there's not perception. So from the perspective of perspective, there is only perspective. It's an abstract thought that there is a lack of perception. Any time when there is no perception. That's an abstract thought. So for example, we go to sleep at night, we wake up in the morning. I found this a fun experience myself. I had surgery some years back, and they gave me, they put me on anesthetics or anesthesia or whatever it is that puts you to sleep. And I remember I was talking with the anesthesiologist as they were releasing the substance, and I was saying, yeah, so he says, I'm going to release anesthesia, and so how long will it take? And that was the last thing I remember. And suddenly, I continue the sentence. He says, when I came to, he says, good morning. And I said, what do you mean, good morning? We haven't even started yet. He says, no, it's done. Your whole surgery's done. Been out for a half hour or however long surgery was. I had no memory. As far as I was concerned, I was still having the conversation that we were having before the anesthesia took effect. There was simply no memory. And there was no perception anyway. As I perceived it, there was no perception during that time. It was like a whole section of perception was erased. There was the conversation, and then there was awake, and there was nothing in between. These two just bridged together as if there was no perception. But that is assuming that there was no perception. Consider that there might have been perception and simply no recall. There might be perception and memory, but no recall. It's kind of a horrible thought that you might have actually experienced the surgery and simply have no recall of it. But during the surgery, you might have felt every single bit of it. The issue with this is we have no way of proving that that is or is not true. And the reason is, from the perception of perception, there's only perception. From the perception of reality, there is just perception. So you have this mental construct of some original perception, and then another mental construct of a perception, a simulation, within the original perception. But reality is, those are just concepts. Those are just concepts, just thoughts. Whether this is a simulation or there's some original, in either case, there's only perception, which eliminates the entire need for the concept of a simulation. And what that means is, in a way, it's completely irrelevant whether this is some original reality or a simulation. It just is. It is as it is. It is perception. And the way to work with that perception most harmoniously is to perceive it directly without all the mental constructs laid over it in the attempt to understand or box in the perception to say it is equal to this or that. You just relax into pure perception. And the relaxing into pure perception it removes a kind of pressure, a lot of mental noise. And it allows an embracing or an enjoyment, a play within the perception that would otherwise not be there. One of the things that one of my mentoring students asked, actually, if, the spirituality always seems so serious. And that there's never any talk about having fun. Is there any space for having fun in spirituality? And now, the word spirituality in itself is a little problematic, I guess we could say, because there's almost this idea that spirituality is something separate than just this perception, than just perception. So in a sense, it's almost a meaningless word. I use it because it's sort of the genre that my book has to fit into. But the reality is there's perception. And that's all that there can be is perception. And so then there's an attitude. Okay, this perception can either be flat and dull and serious, or we can enjoy perceiving. So let's, the word we can enjoy perceiving is a little misleading, or the perception can be enjoyable. Allow it to be enjoyable. It's the attempt to kind of understand it that makes it really serious. The attempt to kind of box it in and give it a frame that makes it very serious, or the attempt to navigate it or to control it makes it very, very serious. But in a lot of ways, the awakened one recognizes, those who are awakening recognize that the attempt to control it is actually what causes a great deal of their suffering. And in a way, if you go back to the idea as reality simulation, that's an attempt to kind of control it. The great irony of this is, according to Elon Musk, once artificial intelligence takes off, it will be out of human control because it will be self-learning. And so even the attempt to control the offspring of our intelligence will be out of our control. Everything in life is teaching us this lesson. It's a constant reminder, but that people tend to resist anyway. It's fear that we can't control everything. There's a very small degree of control, and I think that word is not exactly the most appropriate word. But it's almost like surfing. You don't describe surfing as controlling your surfboard, because it's a relationship. The board, the body, the wave, the wind. It's a harmonic effect. What do I mean by harmonic effect? It's where there two things comes together, and when they come together, it creates a kind of a third effect or a third aspect. One of my survival instructors used to whistle and hum at the same time, and so you got whistling and you got humming. But when you put the two together, there's an extra depth to it. It's that extra depth is more than its two component aspects. You feel it holistically through the body. And life in actuality is like that. But we tend to try to break it down into its component parts and eviscerate it. And that's what creates the tension and the struggle. So what we do instead is we recognize in this moment there's this sort of harmonic possibility simply by shifting attitude and perceiving directly, allowing that direct perception, enjoying that direct perception, embracing that direct perception regardless of outcomes as much as possible. You know, when the hang noose is around your neck, you may not enjoy that. However, it may be possible to do that. We're working toward even the ability to smile into death. We're working toward that. And it's not necessary to be there now, because that will be another willfulness, another attempt to control. And all of these things, these attempts to control, these willfulnesses, the desire to be perfect right now, and all that, that is of the mind, and it's sort of a snake eating its own tail. It actually inhibits the capacity to be at peace, to be at harmony. Instead of forcing it now, it's more harmonious to just move toward that, or to be open to that possibility, to relax into that possibility. Perfection is an opinion. Instead, embrace direct perception and set aside the opinions. Embrace it as much as possible in this moment. There's no need to understand it. If you get a chance, you might enjoy watching the Joe Rogan, Elon Musk interview. It's about 3 hours. It's quite interesting. Another interesting aspect of that interview was that Elon Musk reveals the fact that his brilliance, his genius, is torturous to him because it never shuts off. That is the strength of his left hemisphere. It's something people want. We want to be more intelligent. We want to be more, genius. And that might be a high value for many people. But just recognize that it comes at a cost. He can't shut it off. It's torturous to him. When Joe asked, what's it like to be like you, where these ideas are overflowing all the time, he's like, it's not pleasant. it's not all it's cracked up to be, is sort of his attitude towards it. You might enjoy that. What's happened is that intelligence has taken on a life of its own. It's sort of it's racing away with him. And that's what's happened to humanity. It's not that intelligence is wrong, but when it's out of context, when it's out of balance, it's the attempt to understand everything, and it creates a kind of overwhelm and nervous system overwhelm. It's very difficult to have any amount of peace within. And I found it interesting how Elon Musk tries to have fun with everything he does. That's probably necessary for his amount of intelligence. Imagine he might go insane if he didn't have that approach to play with everything. But it's a useful approach to play, and fun is important. It is a compensation for him, certainly for his intelligence, I suspect. But if we look at all of nature, there's a kind of play involved, an exploration that's involved with any animal that has intelligence. They're exploring. It's all right. Explore perception. Play with it. Allow curiosity. It's all right. Don't be too serious about everything. Take your sense of self with a grain of salt. There are going to be plenty of failures. I don't, someone asked me, when's the last time you got upset? Well, I'm going to surely get upset from time to time. I don't think of it as a failure. It's just part of the process. It happens less and less and less. If we go back 10 years, it happened a lot more than it happens now. And that is as it should be. As soon as we have the idea that awakening is instant and then we're just perfected forever, that is an idea. It is an idea. And I know many teachers teach that way. I do not. It's because it is willful. And the result is it creates sort of an arrogant type. Usually you see this in the students. You'll see them walking around and correcting each other and pointing out each other's disharmonies and failures. And it's like, well, that's not a fun place to be. That's not at all the point. So instead, it's easier just to relax into it. And then you might find it gets a lot easier. And it's not necessary to box it or understand it or try to control it or be too willful. It's not necessary to be perfect. So that's sort of a little demonic voice within. I'm not opposed to the idea that perfection couldn't emanate from the human being. I'm quite open to that, but I'm not going to force it. Allow it to happen naturally. Allow it to happen naturally. So in the teachings of meditation, I have a meditation class coming up. There's a fundamental teaching, which is never more than 10% willfulness, never more than 10% focus, never more than 10% effort. And it's a recognition that if I say to you, if you've never swum and I throw you into the deep end and I say, hey, just relax, you'll drown. You're not going to be able to, your nervous system you're going to go into panic mode. You're simply not going to be able to relax. You're going to flail around and drown. We have to acknowledge that fact. We don't need to be idealistic about the awakening process. And so that teaching is a recognition that to say to a person, you just 100% have to relax and just let it be, it's just not going to be possible for most people. This is not going to happen. And so we start with that never more than 10%, and we just get a little bit less and a little bit less effort. And eventually it's just seamless effortlessness. It flows with all of your life. Is reality a simulation? No, there's just perception. No matter what format it comes in, doesn't matter if it's a computer, if it was God, or whatever, none of that stuff matters. That's all just mental babble. Because it can't be measured. And if it can't be measured, because you'd have to be outside of the system to measure it, the only thing we can say is, with human words, the closest we can get and use words, we can say there's perception. Or we could even less definite than that, we could say there is. And even that's not correct, but that's the closest we can get. I describe it as isness. I know others describe it as isness. I find it so fascinating. I was describing it as isness before having read any non-dualistic teachings. It's because this is the only word you could come up with that fits it, and then come to see that I found a person on the internet, Muji, who uses the same word, isness. One of my teachers later used to use the word beingness. Muji uses that word as well. I use that word as well, but I inherited that word I borrowed that word from my meditation teacher. Isness is something that just sort of comes. I think when you reach this place of totality, whatever you want to call that, the, all of the words start to fail, and pretty much you're just left with isness and beingness is really pretty much the closest you can get. Those words still fail. They're just not quite as heavy as every other word. And so it's natural that people would gravitate towards those terminologies. Another one is emptiness. I actually find that to be a little bit misleading, and because when you use that word meditation, people that meditate towards emptiness, what ends up often happening is they may find silence, but it's sort of a dead feeling inside. And that's not what I'm talking about, really. It's not flat. It's almost like a beer full of suds, or, a soda with this carbon in it or something. There's a fullness, an exuberance, a fullness. That's what I'm talking about, the perception. When one embraces perception. When there's perception without the embracing of perception, you get this sort of feeling of emptiness, which is sort of flat. And the body doesn't actually appreciate that very much. But I test movement, and so I will grab onto my students and see, and try to resist a movement. If they can move effortlessly, I know that they've got that fullness. Some degree of that fullness is in their meditation, in their perception. And if they can't, it's flat. It's too flat. It's not enough fullness, which means there's some sort of resistance going on, or some sort of idea going on, some sort of disconnect. The idea of a simulation inside of reality is a disconnect. The idea that the universe has size is a disconnect. It's an idea. It's a mind based on some kind of comparison, measurement. It's a mental construct purely, and it is not direct perception. I guess that's about it for this topic. Hopefully the rabbit hole was somewhat, was not perturbing. Hopefully you had fun with this. Some people have, if you would like to support this channel, I would love to welcome you to donate, and you can donate to my PayPal at contact@richardhaight.net. I have a link below. If you're interested in the meditation classes, they will start next Wednesday, September, what would that be? September 12th at 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I'll have the cutoff time for joining be Tuesday night. And so you can check that out at my website, www.richardhaight.net, HAIGHT.net/courses. And you can see it there. So thanks so much. Bye-bye.